Ex-husband and ex-wife forced to confront their past. Will they make amends or face further conflict? Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Mark Anderson and Emily Parker had been married for over a decade. Their relationship, once full of love and dreams for the future, had slowly crumbled under the weight of misunderstandings, unmet expectations, and personal differences. It had taken years for them to finally admit that their marriage was beyond repair, and they had parted ways. But the years apart had done little to erase the emotional scars they both carried. Mark, now 40, had built a successful business, living a life that appeared perfect from the outside. Yet, behind his professional success, he often found himself reflecting on the past, questioning the choices that had led to the end of his marriage. Emily, on the other hand, had reinvented herself. At 38, she was the successful director of a media company, a position that gave her the independence she had always longed for. But no matter how successful she had become, there were moments when she couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness left by her broken relationship with Mark. It was during a charity event that fate intervened, forcing them to cross paths again. The tension was immediate, as if the years of separation had only deepened the unresolved emotions between them. Standing face to face for the first time in years, neither knew exactly what to say. The air was thick with unspoken words, and both tried to avoid looking directly into each other's eyes. The past was too painful, too fresh, despite the time that had passed. Emily had been the first to break the silence, offering a weak smile, trying to appear calm and composed. Mark, not quite sure what to say or how to react, nodded slowly, still unsure of how to navigate the awkwardness of the moment. There they were, two people who had once shared everything. Now standing on opposite sides of the room, unsure of what the future held. The charity event went on, but the tension between them was undeniable. Mark and Emily both went about their evening, keeping their distance but constantly aware of the other's presence. Neither was ready to address the elephant in the room, but deep down, they both knew it was time to face their past, to finally confront the unresolved issues that had torn them apart years ago. The night seemed to stretch on forever as Mark and Emily continued to navigate the charity event, their minds constantly drifting back to each other. The tension between them was palpable, yet neither dared to make the first move. Emily kept her distance, focusing on the people around her, while Mark remained at the opposite end of the room, his eyes occasionally glancing in her direction, as if searching for something he couldn't quite put into words. As the event drew to a close, the guests began to slowly disperse. Mark and Emily found themselves once again near the exit, standing just a few feet apart. The awkwardness hung in the air like an invisible wall. Neither of them knew how to break it, but both of them knew it was inevitable. After what felt like an eternity of silence, Mark finally took a step forward. "Emily," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of their past lingering between them. Mark cleared his throat, trying to steady his nerves. "We need to talk," he said, his words simple but loaded with meaning. Emily hesitated for a moment, then nodded, her shoulders sagging slightly as if the emotional weight of the conversation was already beginning to settle in. "I know," she replied quietly. "We do." They both knew that this moment had been coming for years. Their separation had never been as clean as they had hoped. There had always been unfinished business, unresolved emotions, and words left unspoken. Now, here they were, standing on the edge of confrontation, ready to face the past they had both tried so hard to forget. Mark led the way outside to the parking lot, the cool night air doing little to ease the tension. They walked in silence for a few moments, either of them eager to bring up the painful memories that had led to their divorce. "I never understood why you left," Mark said suddenly, breaking the silence. His words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. Emily stopped walking, her eyes narrowing slightly as she turned to face him. You never understood? She asked, her voice rising slightly in disbelief. You honestly don't get it? Mark shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. I guess I didn't. Not really. Emily let out a bitter laugh, her eyes flashing with frustration. You were never there, Mark. Not in the way I needed you. You were always busy with work, always too focused on your career to even notice that I was struggling. I was left alone, trying to keep everything together while you kept building your empire. The words were sharp, cutting deep, but they were the truth. Mark had never fully realized how his ambitions had left Emily feeling abandoned, emotionally isolated. I didn't see it like that, he said quietly, guilt creeping into his voice. I thought I was doing it for us. For our future. Emily shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. That's just it, Mark. You were always focused on the future, but you never looked at the present. You never saw me. You never saw how much I needed you in the here and now. Mark felt the weight of her words hit him like a physical blow. He had spent years convincing himself that he was doing everything right, but now, standing in front of her, he realized how wrong he had been. He had been so consumed with his work, with his success, that he had failed to see the cracks forming in their relationship until it was too late. I'm sorry, he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. I should have seen it. I should have been there for you. Emily didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked away, taking a deep breath as she tried to hold back her tears. The pain of the past, the years of feeling unseen and unheard, was still fresh in her mind. But as much as she wanted to push him away, to reject his apology, a small part of her longed for the closure she had never gotten. It's not that simple, Mark, she finally said, her voice breaking slightly. You can't just apologize and expect everything to be fixed. It's not that easy. Mark nodded, understanding that this was not a moment of quick resolution. They had years of hurt to unpack, and a simple apology wouldn't erase the damage that had been done. But this was a start, a small step forward. It wasn't much, but it was something. As the weeks went by, Mark and Emily found themselves unexpectedly running into each other more frequently. It was as if fate was pushing them toward one another, forcing them to continue their conversation, to delve deeper into the emotions they had buried for so long. They had begun to meet up occasionally, for coffee or quick lunches, each time taking small steps toward understanding what had gone wrong. Mark was beginning to understand the depth of Emily's pain, and Emily, in turn, started to see how much Mark had changed since their separation. At first, their conversations were filled with hesitation, like two strangers trying to figure out if they could ever go back to what they once had. But as time passed, the ice started to crack. One afternoon, Mark invited Emily to lunch at a small cafe downtown, a quiet spot where they could talk without interruptions. As they sat down, the familiar discomfort settled in, but it wasn't as heavy as before. Emily took a deep breath, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her cup. Mark, I've been thinking a lot about everything we've talked about, she began, her voice quiet but steady. And I don't want to keep holding on to the past. I don't want to keep blaming you for everything that went wrong, even though I've spent years doing just that. Mark looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and understanding. I know, he said softly. I've spent so much time blaming myself for everything, too. It's been hard, trying to figure out where I went wrong. But I think I'm finally starting to see things from your perspective. Emily nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile crossing her face. It's not just about blaming each other, Mark. It's about understanding what happened, why we let things get to that point. We both made mistakes, and we both hurt each other. Mark swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling deep within him. I know, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I just wish I could have done things differently. I wish I could have been there for you the way you needed me. There was a long pause as they both took in the gravity of the conversation. The years of hurt were still present, but there was also a sense of release in the air, a sense that they were finally coming to terms with the past. Emily looked at him, her expression softened. Mark, I don't know what the future holds for us, but I do know that I need closure. I need to stop carrying this weight around, this bitterness that's been holding me back for so long. I need to let go of the anger. Mark reached across the table, his hand hovering just above hers before he slowly placed it on top. I understand, he said, his voice gentle. I need that too. I need to let go of the guilt, of the feeling that I ruined everything. I need to move forward, whether it's with you or without you. But I can't keep living in the past. Emily squeezed his hand gently, a sense of calm settling over her. Then let's move forward, she said softly. The words hung in the air between them, not as a promise, but as a shared understanding that they were ready to finally face the future, whatever it might look like. As they left the cafe that day, there was a quiet hope that lingered, a sense that, despite everything that had happened, there was still a chance for healing, for growth, and perhaps, just perhaps, for a new beginning. As the days passed, Mark and Emily continued to meet occasionally, their conversations becoming more open, more honest. They found themselves in a new kind of rhythm, a tentative friendship, as they navigated the space between them, no longer just ex-husband and ex-wife but two people who had learned, sometimes painfully, what went wrong. Mark had taken a step back from his hectic work schedule, realizing that his career had consumed more of his life than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about fixing the parts of his life that had been left in disarray. Emily, too, had begun to reevaluate her life, focusing more on her own happiness and what she truly wanted. She had spent so many years chasing success and independence, but now, she found herself wondering if there was more to life than just achievement. One evening, after weeks of these deep, reflective conversations, Emily suggested they take a weekend trip to the mountains, somewhere they could both relax, away from the pressures of their everyday lives. It was a big step, but both felt it was a necessary one, an opportunity to spend time together in a different environment, to see if they could truly be more than the sum of their painful past. The trip was simple, a cozy cabin in the woods. There was no grand plan, no huge expectations, just the chance to breathe. They spent the first day hiking through the trails, the crisp mountain air invigorating their senses. The hike was quiet, with occasional snippets of conversation about the things they had never discussed before, memories from their childhoods, things that shaped who they were now. The hours seemed to fly by, and for the first time in a long while, both felt at ease, no longer weighed down by their past. That evening, after dinner, they sat outside on the porch, looking at the stars. It was peaceful, almost surreal, as the night wrapped around them like a blanket. Emily leaned back in her chair, gazing up at the vast sky. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if things had been different?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a trace of melancholy. Mark didn't immediately respond, lost in his own thoughts. It was a question he had asked himself many times, especially in the months after their divorce. What if they had made different choices? What if they had communicated better, or had not been so wrapped up in their own worlds? But life didn't work like that. All the time, he finally replied, his voice low. But I don't think it helps to keep wondering about what could have been. We can't change the past, Emily. We can only move forward from here. Emily nodded slowly, turning her gaze toward him. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a recognition that they had both grown, both changed. I don't know what the future holds for us, Mark, she said, her tone thoughtful. But I do know that I want to move forward. I want to stop holding on to everything that happened before. Mark looked at her, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Me too, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. The conversation drifted into a comfortable silence as they continued to sit there, side by side, the weight of the past slowly lifting. For the first time, they weren't just ex-husband and ex-wife, but two people who had found their way back to one another, ready to see what the future might bring. As the night grew colder, they headed inside, knowing that the road ahead would not be easy, but at least now, they would face it together. The days following their weekend getaway felt like a turning point for both Mark and Emily. It was as if they had unlocked a new chapter in their relationship, one that was still uncertain but filled with the possibility of growth and healing. Their conversations became more frequent, less guarded. They began to talk not just about their past but about their hopes for the future, things they had never really discussed when they were married. Mark found himself feeling lighter, his heart no longer weighed down by guilt and regret. He had come to realize that the mistakes of the past were not just his to carry. Emily had her part to play in their failed marriage, and she, too, had her own regrets. But they both understood now that the most important thing was not to dwell on what could have been, but to focus on what was yet to come. One evening, as they sat together in Mark's apartment, sipping coffee, Emily brought up something they had barely touched on before. "Mark, I've been thinking about us, about what we're doing now," she began, her voice thoughtful. "I know we've been taking it slow, and I'm grateful for that. But I also want to know, do you think we're heading in the right direction? I mean, what are we even doing here?" Mark looked at her, his expression soft but serious. "I don't know," he admitted. "I guess I'm still trying to figure that out. But I do know that I want to keep moving forward, whether it's with you or not. I want to be better not just for you, but for myself." Emily nodded slowly, taking in his words. "I want that too. But I think we need to be clear about where we're going. We can't keep avoiding the truth, Mark. We need to talk about the possibility of us, about what it would look like to start again, if that's even something we both want." Mark paused, considering her words carefully. He had always believed that their marriage could be fixed, that they could find their way back to each other. But now, standing in front of Emily, he wasn't sure what the future held. The idea of trying again was both exciting and terrifying. "I think we've already started," he said finally. "We're not the same people we were when we first got married. I don't know if that means we can go back to what we had before, but I think we're building something different. Something better. And maybe that's enough." Emily smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Maybe it is," she agreed. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their conversation settling between them. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. It was an understanding that, whatever happened next, they were both willing to explore the possibility of a future together. As the night wore on, they talked more about their individual goals, their dreams, and what they both wanted from life. For the first time in a long time, they weren't just focused on the past. They were focused on the future, on the things they could build together, if they were brave enough to try. And although either of them had the answers yet, they both felt a quiet sense of hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, they were on the right path after all. Mark and Emily's relationship had changed in ways neither of them expected. The progress was slow, but there was undeniable growth. They continued their newfound connection, each day bringing them closer to a place they hadn't thought possible just months before. They were no longer the angry exes who couldn't speak without resentment. They were two people discovering what it meant to rebuild their lives together, but without the weight of past mistakes hanging over them. One Saturday afternoon, they sat in the park, enjoying the warmth of the spring sun. It had become a tradition for them to meet on weekends, walking through the park, or grabbing lunch, simply being together without any expectations. The world around them seemed to have slowed down, and for the first time in a long time, both Mark and Emily felt like they were exactly where they needed to be. As they walked along the path, Mark broke the comfortable silence. "Emily," he began, his voice hesitant but filled with sincerity. "I've been thinking about something. Something I need to say." Emily turned to him, her expression open and patient. "What's on your mind?" she asked, slowing her pace. "I know we've been taking things slowly, and I respect that," Mark said. "But I also want you to know that I'm not just going through the motions. I'm not just trying to make things better out of guilt or obligation. I want this. I want us to move forward. Together. I'm ready to see where this can go." Emily stopped walking and faced him, her heart suddenly racing. The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. She had known Mark's heart was in the right place, but hearing him say it out loud made it all real. "Mark, She paused, unsure of what to say next. There were so many emotions rushing through her. Fear, hope, uncertainty. But most of all, she felt a sense of peace, something she hadn't felt in years. She had spent so long in the chaos of their past, but now, with Mark's words, she realized that maybe, just maybe, they could both build something new, something better. "I want this too," she finally said, her voice soft but sure. "I want to move forward with you. I know it's not going to be easy, and I know we have a lot to work through, but I believe in us. I believe that we're both capable of making this work." Mark smiled, a genuine, relieved smile that lit up his face. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "Because I think we're just getting started. And I'm excited to see what the future holds." They stood there for a few moments, taking in the significance of the conversation. It wasn't the end of their story, but it was a new beginning, one they were both willing to embrace. As they resumed walking through the park, side by side, a sense of calm settled over them. They still had a long way to go, but for the first time, they were walking together in the same direction, towards a future that held hope, love, and the possibility of something real. And that was enough for now. As the weeks passed, Mark and Emily found themselves more and more immersed in the process of rebuilding their relationship. They spent their weekends together, exploring new places, having long conversations about their hopes, dreams, and the lessons they had learned from the past. Each day felt like a fresh start, and although there were moments of uncertainty, they both felt a deep sense of peace. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when old wounds resurfaced, but they had both made a conscious decision to face those challenges together. One evening, after a quiet dinner at Emily's apartment, they sat on the couch, enjoying a rare moment of calm. Mark looked over at Emily, his eyes thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about the future lately," he said. "About what we've talked about and what we want to do moving forward. I know it's still early, but I can't help but wonder, what does this all look like? Us, I mean. What do we want this to be?" Emily met his gaze, her expression soft. She had been thinking about the same thing, but the idea of defining their relationship so soon made her feel uneasy. They had come so far, but the uncertainty of the future still loomed over them. "I don't know, Mark," she replied, her voice gentle. "I think we've made so much progress, but I'm still not sure what's next for us. I'm not ready to rush into anything, and I don't want to put too much pressure on what we're doing right now. We're learning to be ourselves again, separately and together. And that's important." Mark nodded, understanding where she was coming from. "I get it," he said. "We don't have to rush. I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm here for whatever this is, whatever it becomes." There was a long pause as they both let the silence settle between them, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Emily appreciated his honesty, but she knew that the path forward would take time. They had both been hurt, and they needed to move at their own pace. "I think I need more time," she said, breaking the silence. "Not because I don't want this, but because I want to make sure we're doing it for the right reasons. I don't want to jump into something and regret it later. I need to feel confident in what we're building." Mark's heart swelled with affection for her. He admired her self-awareness, her honesty. "I respect that," he said, reaching for her hand and holding it gently. "We'll take it one step at a time. There's no rush." The conversation marked a turning point for both of them. They realized that while they had made great strides in rebuilding their relationship, there was still more to uncover, more to heal. But they were committed to doing it together, with patience and understanding. The next few months were filled with small victories and setbacks. There were moments when old habits and fears crept back in, but each time they faced those challenges, they did so with a renewed sense of commitment to each other. They didn't have all the answers, but they knew they were building something stronger than before. One afternoon, as they sat together on Mark's balcony, watching the sunset, Emily turned to him, her face serene. "Mark," she said softly, "I'm starting to think that maybe this is how it was supposed to happen. Maybe we needed to go through all of that to get here." Mark smiled, his eyes reflecting the warmth of the setting sun. "Maybe we did," he agreed. "Maybe we just needed to take the long way around. It wasn't a perfect journey, but it was theirs, and that was enough." They were no longer defined by the mistakes of the past, but by the strength they had found in each other. And for the first time in a long time, they both felt hopeful about the future. As the months went by, Mark and Emily found themselves in a more comfortable routine. They continued to meet regularly, each time growing closer, understanding one another in ways they never had before. Their conversations became more genuine, no longer marked by the distance or resentment of the past. They had learned to appreciate the small moments, to laugh together, to share their daily struggles and joys. One evening, after a long day of work, they met for dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the city. It was a quiet place, the kind of spot where you could hear yourself think, and they liked that about it. Over their meal, they began talking about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. Emily looked across the table at Mark, her eyes filled with a softness that spoke of understanding and acceptance. "You know, I've been thinking a lot lately," she said, her voice calm but thoughtful. "We've come so far since we first started talking again. It feels like we've both grown so much, and I'm really proud of that." Mark smiled, his heart warm at her words. "I feel the same way. I think we've both realized that it's not just about fixing the past, it's about building something new. Something different." Emily nodded, her fingers gently tracing the edge of her wine glass. "Exactly. And I think that's the hardest part for me. Not looking back at what we had, but looking ahead to what we could have. It's terrifying, but also kind of exciting." Mark reached across the table, taking her hand in his grip firm but gentle. "I get it," he said, his voice sincere. "It's scary to think about what comes next, but I think we're both ready for it. We've worked hard to get here, and we're stronger because of it." They sat in silence for a moment, just enjoying the connection between them. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was a reminder that they were willing to face whatever came their way, as long as they faced it together. After dinner, they took a walk along the nearby river. The night air was cool, and the city lights sparkled off the water. It was peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, both Mark and Emily felt at ease. "Do you ever think about the past?" Emily asked, her voice almost a whisper. Mark thought for a moment before answering. "I do, but not in the way I used to. I used to think about it with regret, with the what-ifs. But now, I think about it differently. It's part of who I am, part of what brought me to this moment. And I don't want to forget that." Emily smiled, a sense of peace washing over her. "I think I've come to realize that, too. The past will always be there, but it doesn't have to control us. We can take the lessons from it and move forward." They walked in silence for a while longer, both lost in thought but comforted by each other's presence. The night felt like a new beginning, a fresh chapter in their lives that they were both eager to write. For the first time in a long time, neither of them was looking back. They were looking ahead, to a future that was uncertain but full of promise. They didn't know exactly what that future would look like, but they knew they were ready to face it, together. As the months passed, Mark and Emily continued to grow closer, but this time, it felt different. The bond they shared was no longer weighed down by the baggage of their past. They had both made a conscious decision to start fresh, to give each other the opportunity to prove that they were not defined by the mistakes they had made. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, they found themselves building a new kind of relationship, one based on understanding, patience, and respect. One evening, Mark invited Emily to join him for a quiet dinner at his apartment. The atmosphere was relaxed, and as they sat down to eat, they both shared a sense of calm. It felt like another step forward, another layer of their connection being strengthened. "I've been thinking a lot about everything lately," Mark said, his voice steady but filled with meaning. "About where we are now and where we're going. I think we're both in a good place. But I also know that we still have a lot to figure out." Emily looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I agree. We've come a long way, but I feel like we're still finding our footing. I think we've both changed a lot, but the question is, are we ready for what's next?" Mark smiled, a hint of uncertainty still lingering in his eyes. "I think we're ready. I mean, I know we're not perfect, and there will still be challenges ahead, but I believe we've both learned from our past. We've learned what we need from each other, and we've learned how to communicate better. Emily nodded, her fingers gently tracing the rim of her glass. That's true. I think the hardest part for me has been trusting again. I spent so much time guarding my heart, afraid of getting hurt. But I realize now that I can't keep living in fear. If we're going to make this work, we have to trust each other. We have to be open. Mark reached across the table, his hand brushing against hers. I know. And I'm ready for that. I think we've both earned the right to be happy, to build something together. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their words hanging in the air. It wasn't a grand revelation, but it was significant. It was a commitment to continue moving forward, to embrace the uncertainty of what the future held. As the evening wore on, their conversation shifted to lighter topics, future travel plans, dreams, and the things they both wanted to experience together. It was a reminder that, even though the road they had traveled together hadn't been easy, it was theirs, and they had come through it stronger. Later that night, after Emily left, Mark stood by the window, looking out over the city. There was still uncertainty ahead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. He had learned the importance of patience and understanding. He had learned that love wasn't always perfect, but it was worth fighting for. And most of all, he had learned that sometimes, the hardest things in life, the things that break us, are also the things that help us grow. As he turned off the lights and went to bed, he couldn't help but smile. Whatever the future held, he was ready to face it, as long as Emily was by his side.